We're seeing more IT participation. We're seeing more OT participation. And I think that's one of the messages that the show tries to promote is how do we bring together these significantly different organizations and try and spread this message, try and say, look, we know that OT can't do this on their own. They don't necessarily have the skill sets. They don't have the needs, the labor shortage that they've got. IT, they can't do this. They don't own the assets. They can't get to the plant floor. They don't understand the PLCs. They don't understand the engineering. But together, we can do it. And I would go back and say that's where we see the most successes when organizations work together.
Hey, I'm Dino Busalachi, the Chief Technology Officer and OT guy at Delta Technology.
Hi, I'm Jim, the COO and IT guy.
And I'm Craig Duckworth, President and CEO.
You're listening to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Show.
In each episode, we bring you the inside scoop on the world of industrial cybersecurity.
We talk about everything you don't know
that you should know. So plug in and power up. The show's about to get started.
Hi, I'm Dino Busalachi, one of the co-founders of Delta Technology. I'm the Chief Technology Officer.
And I'm Craig Duckworth, the other co-founder of Delta Technology. I'm the president and the CEO. Today, I think we're going to talk about the S4 conference that we just got back from. This was a conference that Dino and I just attended in Miami. Dino, I'll throw it over to you. This is your first one. What'd you think initially?
Well, South Beach, Miami's a beautiful place to hang out in the winter months as you're coming out of the winter, going into spring. So even though it was my first S4 OT conference, and I've seen webinars and podcasts and information on it over the past couple of years, but I've also attended a lot of other industrial events that have a lot of OT cybersecurity events and with vendors and asset owners and webinars, Rockwell Automation Fair, for example. I've attended those for a couple of decades. And over the last 5, seen the emphasis of OT, IT, IDS, OT cybersecurity really develop and grow in these organizations as far as part of their portfolio of their greater event. S4 is very specific to OT, IDS security. And a lot of new players, a lot of them are our partners that we work with today. There was a lot of asset owners there, what I understand. Met a few, but for me, it was a little eye-opening. I think there was some of the old guard is still there that have been part of that environment for the last several years. And you got a lot of new players that are entering into the event. And then some, I was surprised that they weren't there. Like Siemens was there, but Rockwell wasn't there. TX1 and Fortinet were there, but Cisco wasn't there. You got to think about the industry players, those that not only just have the software, but also those that have the hardware for the industrial environment, for providing cybersecurity solutions and technologies when those control system environments.
Yeah, and I would say that makes sense. With me, this is the second year, so I was there last year as well. So it was a new perspective. I was glad to see the additional asset owners that were there. That was something that Dale Peterson, the show organizer, made sure that he had a good mix of vendors, of asset owners, and try to make sure that this was more encompassing of the industry, not just the players that represent the industry. I would say from my standpoint, I saw the same thing. We saw the normal OT industrial cyber players, the Clarities, the Nozomis, the Dragoses, they were all there, which you would expect. But you're right, the absence of some of the other ones was a bit shocking.
And IT too. Where was the IT people, right? CISOs and CIOs. Not saying that there probably weren't some there. I mean, we knew one that was there, one of our clients who was there actually doing a speak with TX1. But in general, you didn't see a lot of IT people. And I would say the same thing about Rockwell Automation Fair. It's not loaded with a lot of IT leadership and professionals, which I think is part of the problem and why this is a little difficult. And if you look at some of the traditional cybersecurity events that out there, RSA and a few others that are attended by thousands and thousands of asset owners. You're not seeing that on the OT IDS side. And I can see why. I mean, I was just talking to a very large company today, 120 plants around the world, and they're just now beginning this process, right? It's like OT cybersecurity is a thing. It really is a thing. Yeah, it is. But when you think about it in general terms, organizationally, it's still in its infancy. generally speaking. So for S4, it's like, what comes next? You're going to try to keep a lid on it, or are you going to blow it out where you can actually get 15,000, 20,000 people to attend such an event to learn about all these technologies and solutions that are out there? I mean, think how many vendors were there.
Yeah,
I mean,
a lot.
There are a lot, all the key players, a lot of our partners there. And even those that are true OT IDS software development companies, some of them didn't even really have a presence there outside the one Cabana session setup they had on Wednesday, where you could see Nozomi and you could see Clarity and you could see Armis versus Tenable and Forescout and Dragos. And I'm sure there's some I'm forgetting that actually had booths that were there. They were set up. It's interesting dynamic when you think about who we would consider the big players in this space. And I think we know who they are. I mean, we're practitioners, been doing this for several years, so we're not new to the game. And we work with these tools all day, every day in clients all over North America. It's like, what's next for S4 in this realm, where it can really get a larger group of asset owners, I'm going to say whether IT or OT, into this discussion and to start paying attention to it. And I think that there needs to be more organizations that have been on this journey for a few years, large companies, talking about their journey into the OT cybersecurity space. Not everybody wants to talk about their cybersecurity. It's one of the things they want to keep close to their vest, right? Cloak and dagger. But at some point, they got to be able to demonstrate why this is relevant. Because a lot of the messaging that I hear back from clients that are beginning this process is the whole cost structure. They don't even know what that may look like.
It's difficult when you look at new technologies that are, and I say new, they're relatively new in the last 6 or 7 years, that are in a environment, OT versus IT, that is not accustomed to the same rack rate, room rates for the fees that they're paying. You look at manufacturing in general, and I would say this, and it may not have things to do with the attendance. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I go back and I want 15,000 asset owners at this trade show, for example, we're just going to shut down manufacturing for the day and we're going to bring them all there? Or how does that work versus
Rockwell does it. They're able to do it.
IT organization that was sitting in an office.
Well, and that's a good point. Think about the price differences that we witnesses between the work that we do and what IT does at the same client, right? It's 3x. That's a little eye-opening for organizations to sit there and go, well, if I could do this for 50 grand from an IT perspective, why does it cost $150,000 to go do the plant side of this, even for one site? And it just use that as an example, but it is a 3x number, 10 grand versus 30.
They don't recognize what we do and the labor and the work and the detail that we're putting in. We're not able to sit behind a computer and just type in all the information like an IT team would do for a pen test or for a vulnerability scan or something like that, where we're actually physically in the plant, opening panels, looking at all the information that's there. It's a big difference if you have to go through and do an assessment on 1.5 million square foot of physical real estate versus 50 switches on a VLAN.
That you can do from your desk. Right?
Right, yeah.
You don't even have to go out onto the plant floor. Don't even have to show up on the plant to even do that work versus having to actually physically go out there and wear the uniform, as I like to call it, with all your safety gear, your PPE, and get out there and start cracking open panels to look at the ICS infrastructure. And I think that going back to the S4 stuff, I don't think they really get into so much on how you execute case studies. They're so focused sometimes on asset inventory is important, and that is relevant. Everybody knows why. The question is whether you want to do it in a continuous manner or is a snapshot in time good enough? I would say it's not, because things change all the time in the plants.
True.
And I think you want to be aware of that. To me, that's one aspect of this. The other is how much is really pure attacking of control systems, is what people would say. What is really being attacked here? And I would say that there's a lot of things that impact that control system environment, more so than just somebody writing a specific malware that's attacking a particular ControlLogix PLC from Rockwell.
What we see all the time, 65, 70% of the disruption, unplanned, unscheduled on the plant floor, is internal errors.
Without a doubt.
Where IT just simply doesn't understand the implications of their actions. And when they're doing a vulnerability scan or they're doing a port scan on the OT assets and the disruption that it causes.
Well, it can even be OT doing it to themselves, making a PLC change.
True.
There's somebody making a PLC change and it messes up the production facility. Do you want to see that? Is it relevant and important to you as an asset owner? Do you want to improve your unplanned, unscheduled downtime? In my experience in manufacturing, outside of safety, that's the other number one job, is reducing that unplanned, unscheduled downtime. What does a half a day downtime cost you? And if it costs you $500,000, for example, and that's not depending on your industry, that's not unheard of. These tools pay for themselves 4 and 5 times over. Just with one major hiccup that cost you a half a day and shuts your plant down, had a sewer product or whatever. So the question for executives, how does, again, S4, getting into those types of agendas besides OT cybersecurity? Let's talk commercially from a business transaction aspect of it. What does it mean to do this? And you've heard me say this 100 times. Are you exercising the same amount of due diligence to secure and protect the control system environment as you do the enterprise? And we know the answer to that. And what I've heard from CIOs when you say that to them is, well, you know how much that's going to cost? Yeah, I've got a pretty good idea what it's going to cost, but why aren't you doing it?
If you go back to the S4 piece, the mix of OT and IT aren't equivalent in the room. We're seeing more IT participation. We're seeing more OT participation. And I think that's one of the messages that the show tries to promote is how do we bring together these different, significantly different organizations and try and spread this message, try and say, look, we know that OT can't do this on their own. They don't necessarily have the skill sets. They don't have the needs, the labor shortage that they've got. IT, they can't do this. They don't own the assets. They can't get to the plant floor. They don't understand the PLCs. They don't understand the engineering. But together, we can do it. And I would go back and say that's where we see the most successes when organizations work together. One can't do it all, and it needs to be a blend. But we don't see an organization sending, let's say, 2 or 3 individuals from a client, an asset owner, to this event, the CIO, the operations manager, and a controls engineer. And the 3 of them sit down in the sessions, or the 3 of them go and talk to the vendors and say, hey, our situation's a little unique. Here's what we do. And from an IT perspective, here's what I'm looking for. And the controls engineer says, well, I need this. And together they try to work through that. That's a piece that's missing.
Well, they can't serve 2 masters.
True.
Meaning that at the end of the day, somebody is responsible for what happens in that plant, right?
True.
And producing goods and running the plant in a safe manner. I never see IT stepping up and owning that role. Getting back to where are the unique case studies on why putting all of those vendors that were S4, where are their case studies that presenting the good, the bad, and the ugly of what they've witnessed in this, not only from just the technology itself, but the interaction, the behavior, the culture, the organizational challenges with doing this work. If you're going to go pick your OT/IDS platform, what is the methodology for doing that and why? How do you start? Where do you start? And we've seen IT groups start these things. At least you give them credit for at least beginning the process. But as soon as they start making conversations around, well, we want to put in Sentinel-1. Do you have any idea what it's going to take to put Sentinel-1 out there on machines that have been running Windows OSs for a decade? Some of them are end of life. I just listened to this just a week or so ago. Again, an IT cybersecurity professional, been at it for over a decade, maybe 2, and he's already misstepping in what he thinks he can do on that plant floor. So how does this messaging get centered around? How do you do this? If I went back over 20 years ago and working with Cisco and Rockwell specifically on what was the criteria for building out an enterprise class infrastructure within a plant for networking of control systems. Because if you needed a wide area network design strategy, they had it. If you needed a campus network design strategy, they had it. Architectures including. They had data center. They had, here's how you build a network for your business. And it took a little while to get groups like Rockwell and Cisco together. And, Siemens participated in the rest of them on what now we call it the CPWE, right? The Converged Plant-Wide Ethernet Network. Here's what a network in a plant should look like. You need to have an IDMZ. You need clear separation between IT and OT. And then when you look at that network, who owns that network below the IDMZ? And that's a coin toss, depending on the organization. Because you'll hear people say IT owns those network switches, and you'll turn around and open up that panel and say, do they own these Hirschman switches in here? Is this their responsibility? Because you told me your standard was Cisco, but yet you got Hirschman, you got Scalence over here, you got Tsukomias over there, and you got Tashi boxes over here, got all this different stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, IT is never going to step up and say they own that, because they didn't design it, they didn't put it in. Right. Getting into unique case studies on how you go about and doing this, I think is one of the things from an S4 perspective I didn't see at the event is how do you do this? You got all these vendors selling this stuff. How do you go do it? So what's the best practices for this?
So when you look back at the vendors that we did see, the new ones, the old ones, the absentee ones that were really not there, were there any technologies that were new that really kind of caught your attention that we were like, now that's a great idea, or I can see where that would really begin getting traction? Anything that kind of stood out for you?
Yeah, Schneider and TX1, Schneider Electric TX1, and some of the things that they're doing where they're working together around switching equipment and SCADA systems on how they can control like Modbus TCP from a protocol, an OT protocol perspective, and being able to create almost an applicational level security technology event around control systems for things that Schneider knows that cause maintenance issues and support issues with their switchgear, for example. What's a better way to handle that? Where they're working with another vendor like TX1, who has some unique technologies for that around intrusion prevention and the other things that they provide. You don't see that integration at S4 between like Dragos and CrowdStrike, for example, or Rockwell and some of the things that they were doing. Rockwell wasn't there, but Siemens was there demonstrating their RuggedCom stuff, where you're starting to see, we call it the sensor-ready panel. So when you build a machine center, why not harness and encompass some of these OT cybersecurity technologies within that panel build? I didn't see anything like that at S4. Why not? All these vendors are giving you money to run this event, to participate in it. Sure. Why aren't they showing you? It's like, well, how do you put in a sensor on a Cisco switch that's running within this panel because that's what they're using? Or the RuggedCom stuff where Siemens has got Clarity running on a sensor running on a machine center that they have within their environment. Right. To actually show some practicality of how you can use these technologies per se, right? I think most of the software companies out there are just more interested in trying to sell their software. And the services piece is messy.
It is, but again, if I'm a software vendor, if I'm pick one of them, makes no difference, and I get paid to sell the software, I'm going to sell that software. I'm going to wash my hands and I'm going right to the next client. I'm not worried about 3 years later if they're going to renew or not. That's somebody else's problem. I may or may not be here in 3 years. Don't really care. I'm going to make my money because I'm coin operated and I'm on to the next client as fast as I can get there.
Right. And if you're trying to get to an IPO, what's the first thing they get rid of? Services.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But IPO, they're all looking for ARR. But as a salesperson, 3 years later, when that renewal comes in, that's somebody else's issue. But that's a big piece of this that is missing, and how it's being presented to the customers. If they go in, and I'm just going to pick a nice round number, and they say, okay, here's your software solution. We have an OT IDS. It's $100,000. And the client's expectations at that point is, this is a $100,000 piece. They budget $100,000. Everything's fine. And then they go to find a partner to help them make it successful, to get down into that organization. Hey, did they think about sensors? Well, it's a great question. How do they deploy this? What does that look like? And
some think they can do it themselves. Some of them think they can pull it off themselves. It's like, and I'll tell you flat out, you got a year or more of learning to do to be proficient with these tools.
But they don't recognize that sometimes it's a 2x or more cost to deploy, operationalize, and be successful with the platform. So if you spend $100,000 on software, maybe it's another $250 to stand it up, understand it, and get it to a point that the organization can make actionable risk decisions on that data that's coming from it. Now they're sitting in a position of like, I told my board It's $100,000. And now I've got to go back and say, really, that's 400,000 because I forgot all of this that the vendor didn't tell me.
Well, that was like the Sentinel-1 deployment we heard about, where it was $1 million CapEx turned into an $8 million OpEx because the Sentinel-1 was such a pig in their VM environment that was running their SCADA systems. All their HMIs all of a sudden became really sluggish, and some of the apps quit working because they laid this IT-specific EDR technology in an environment that's not well understood.
True.
It's like putting a round peg in a square hole. But that's the mentality of IT. This will work. And no, it won't. And OT has to be, and then this is where you get into the whole IT OT conundrum where sometimes you get at odds with each other because you only get to screw up so many times before they're like, you stay out of my stuff. And I would argue in a lot of cases, IT is very happy to stay out of their stuff, in my view.
It is.
And I've seen that. I've witnessed that at the executive level, the CIO level, basically say, yeah, that's I don't want to be over there and messing with that stuff. I just don't. And so OT has to start, as we've heard us say in these podcasts, time to grow up, time to mature, time to take the reins, be the quarterback, and start running with this. And then you can bring IT in as you see fit for integrations, giving them information that they need to push on up to through their auditing and management concerns that they have. But when you're putting in a tool that's predominantly 85+% geared for OT, tell me, IT, what are you planning to get out of it? What are you looking for?
Well, yeah, for sure.
What are you going to do? I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do?
They don't know. That's the problem.
Those PLCs over there, the firmware on them, that hasn't been touched in 5 years. Can it be? Yeah, probably. But you're not going to touch them, and you're not going to push the firmware down to them. Somebody else is going to do that, and it's the people that are responsible for those assets. Same thing with the HMIs. Same thing with the networking switches that are sitting out there running those control systems. The historians, the application servers, et cetera. Go on and on and on and on. Tell me what you're going to do. And when you find out you're not going to do anything, then why the hell are you even involved in the decision-making process?
Because somebody at the organization has said, you're responsible for security. And they believe that that's their responsibility.
Yeah, right.
So if we go back, was there one particular session that you sat in on or one particular thing that you felt was really a key takeaway from the sessions?
Yeah, for me, it's OT platforms geared for specific verticals. So for instance, if you're in the rail industry, there are OT IDS platforms out there that are specifically for the rail industry. The way it's built, its structure.
Trains, right?
It's dashboards.
Railroad industry.
Railroad, choo-choo trains, light rail, freight, heavy, all of it. Tier 1. There are OT IDS platforms that are being developed and designed for specific verticals. I see in the future there'll be ones for refineries.
Okay.
Maybe specific types of packaging lines from a vendor, because there's a lot of OEMs out there that build packaging lines, KHS, Crohn's, et cetera. Some of them. Why not have an OT IDS template specifically for packaging lines? So a lot of the work we do, when you think from an engineering perspective, localizing, operationalizing the tools today as practitioners, what we go out there and do when we set up an OT IDS platform in a manufacturing facility, we're doing that work already. Here's your palletizer, here's your filler, here's your depal, here's your pasteurizer, here's your labeler, and build that tool so that it looks familiar to the OT folks, almost like a SCADA system, right? Control SCADA system, right?
Right.
And so there was a session, the speaker came from a company, a software development company that focuses on rail, but he didn't really talk about rail. He was talking about OT IDS specific technologies for a particular vertical, or maybe there should be one for DCSs, for distributed control systems. If you're using ABB or Honeywell or Emerson, GE, et cetera, Mitsubishi, here is a OT IDS platform specifically for that stuff. And even then, it still gets back to that sensor-ready panel. If you already have the platform in place, why aren't you making sure that any lifecycle replacement activities you got going, any capital projects that you got going on to replace and or expand control systems, why aren't you putting sensors in those panels when you're building that machine set?
Yeah. I would say for me, there were a couple of different ones. The speeches with Dale and Rob Lee was really good. The back and forth with them and what we're seeing from an industry. I kind of like the funny stuff. One of the skits was there, which I participated in last year, as we know, was your favorite OT metric. That was interesting this year. They had a couple of different perspectives on it, but it was good. Again, this year, it was when is enough enough? So the speaker went through an analysis of, okay, at what point can you get too far down? Can you get so much data? When do we say enough is enough? Organizations, vendors are trying to say, you have to have this and you have to have that, and you need this on top of it, you need that on top of that. And when do we stop? Is there an end in sight? Or is this just like on the IT side, we are still in the infancy, and it's conceivably there is not an end. So it really is interesting when you look at it.
Well, it's not slowing down. It gets bigger and bigger. The train's left the station. The question is, you have to decide when you're going to get on the train. Any listeners out there, if you're an asset owner, do you have an OT IDS platform? If you're on the OT side and you know that you have an OT IDS platform that IT's put in and you don't have access to it, that's a problem. Number one, you should be getting, and I'm not just talking about getting reports. I'm talking about having access to the dashboard, creating widgets specifically for your control system environment. If you don't have a back and forth, to your point, dialogue with IT, with what that OT IDS platform's doing, that's a red flag. And we see that because we know, and big companies that have done it, where it's all cloak and dagger, they put in a tool and OT doesn't have any access to it, which is something that we demand. Because when we operationalize and localize these tools, we're setting it up for OT. Again, remember, 85% of the data in that system is for the OT guys. It's not for the IT guys. So why are you holding on to it, not letting them have access to it? That would be my messaging on that front. But as far as S4 goes, time will tell. It was a great show. I was happy to attend. I'm sure I'll go back and learn more about it and see what it looks like as it grows. You've been around this stuff as long as I have been, watching certain events grow over time, just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I would expect S4 to do that. Dale's got
I think it's going to.
Yeah, it will. But there has to be something that's more than people pushing back and saying, we're not really seeing a lot of attacks to control systems. Again, these tools are more than just about attacks on control systems, process integrity, focused on unplanned and scheduled downtime. There are things that they bring to the table across the board that are beneficial to the organization. And at the same time, what should a structure look like between IT and OT in this realm? How should you put that structure together?
Well, that's a whole nother podcast in itself.
Yeah.
That's hours and hours. But I agree with you. And next year, they announced it this year that it's moving to Tampa. So it's going to be in a different location versus South Beach. So let's see if he may open it up and expand it to more people, to a larger venue. Just looking for change of scenery. Not sure, but I'm with you. I'm looking forward to next year. I think that as the industry continues to grow, we all begin evolving. And I think this is a big piece of it. So I'm looking forward to it. So perfect. Well, thanks for the conversation. It was great. I know that I had fun in South Beach. I know you did. It was a fantastic show to see all the partners and the vendors and the asset owners that we did. So I appreciate everybody for listening. Thanks very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Podcast. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to cover, please leave us a review or let us know. If you're interested in learning more about Velta technology and how you can get safer sooner, visit veltatech.com. That's BELTA tech.com. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.